Welcome to the LACUNY Institute 2024. My name is Nelson Santana, and I am the co-chair of this year's conference, along with LACUNY President, Professor Derek Stadler, Web Services Librarian and Head of Media Services at LaGuardia Community College. Last year, I addressed you as assistant professor, and 1 year later, I addressed you as associate professor and deputy chief librarian at Bronx Community College. I share this tidbit because the Library Association of the City University of New York has played a pivotal role in my professional development as a librarian and member of the faculty here at the City University of New York, CUNY. Hint, hint, we're looking for members to join the CUNY and serve in leadership roles, the roundtables, etc. It's a fantastic organization, fantastic association. The LACUNY Institute is the premier annual conference of the Library Association of the City University of New York, LACUNY. It is an honor to address you for the third time as chair or co-chair of the annual LACUNY Institute. The Library Association of the City University of New York has been in existence since 1939. LACUNY is a professional association and a model that institutions of higher learning and or associations across the nation can study and emulate. LACUNY is a community for library workers and students within CUNY and beyond CUNY. Since 2020, LACUNY has provided a virtual space for all types of professionals and students, and colleagues from outside of CUNY have certainly participated in our annual event. It is only appropriate to thank everyone who made this two-day conference possible. Presenters, our keynote speaker, Professor Emily Drabinski, everyone who registered, the LACUNY Executive Council, LACUNY delegates, the LACUNY Institute Planning Committee, our sponsors, and of course, you, our attendees. We thank our sponsors, EBSCO, Gold Sponsor, SAGE, Silver Sponsor, Oxford University Press, Silver Sponsor. There will be representatives from each sponsor, and we ask that you please communicate with them. You can chat via the different Zoom links, etc., and we will be sharing their information with you as well. It is important to acknowledge all the members of the LACUNY Institute Planning Committee, whom are all amazing individuals and a joy to work with. These individuals worked very, very hard behind the scenes to make sure that we were able to deliver this conference to you. They are LACUNY President, Professor Derek Stadler, LaGuardia Community College, Professor Dianne Gordon Conyers, LaGuardia Community College, Professor Iris Finkel, Hunter Community College, Hunter College, I apologize. Professor Nanette Johnson, New York City College of Technology, Professor AJ Pathak, Hunter College, Professor Mark Aaron Polger, College of Staten Island, Professor Alexandra Rojas, LaGuardia Community College, and LACUNY Vice President, Professor Nicole Williams, CUNY School of Medicine. I will now present you I will leave you with Professor Derek Stadler, President of LACUNY.
Good morning, everybody. Excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to just have a brief slideshow just to kind of go over a few items from LACUNY. Okay, I just wanted to acknowledge our current, but not much longer, Executive Council officers, including myself, Nicole Williams, Vice President-elect, Nanette Johnson, Treasurer, Madeline Ruggiero, Secretary, and of course, Nelson, who is past President. I do want to go over our winners of the Dalia Leonardo Library School Scholarship. Just really briefly, we can just see all who the names are. The two winners are Gianna Nicole Fracalvieri and Jana M. Luttrell, who won a $750 scholarship. And the winners of our J. Bernstein Memorial Scholarship, which is in honor of the late J. Bernstein, and it includes a one-year membership fee to LACUNY, and the winners of that award were Jill Saracella and Mark Aaron Polger. And I just want to congratulate them on winning that award. Usually we typically only hand out one award, but considering the scholarship that both professors had over the past few years, we had to actually award both of them just because of the two nominations were so strong that we decided to give out two awards this year. We also have winners of our travel grants. First, I'll go over the winners from, actually, first, let me mention our Professional Development Committee Chair, Nandy Prince, and thank you for all your hard work with the travel grants and with the presentations for professional development. The fall 2023 winners were Tokumbo Adeshina from Bronx Community College, Joy Dunkley from John Jay College, and Jensen Ortiz from City College. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing names correctly. And the spring winners for 2024, Professor Vanessa Arce Sanati, head of reference Lehman College, Professor Jill Saracella, scholarly communication librarian from the Graduate Center, and Professor Eric Silberberger from Queens College, who is the instructional design and education librarian. They each won a $600 travel grant. And for those of you who have already heard who our election winners are, this will be the executive council. These will be the executive council officers for 2025 to 2020. I'm sorry, 2024 to 2025, beginning on July 1st. Nicole Williams will be president. Mark Aaron Polger will be vice president, president-elect. Charles Keyes will be treasurer, and Rosemary Farrell will be secretary. All right, and I will be the past president at that point. All right, I think that about covers it for me. I just want to welcome everybody to the Institute. I want to thank the planning committee, especially Mark and Nelson, for getting a lot of this underway. I saw some emails last night and this morning that were either way beyond my bedtime, but I know they were working. I don't know if they even got any sleep overnight, but hopefully they did. And I'll turn it back to Nelson.
Thank you so much, Derek. Still, our president. Until June 30th, do not forget, you can't get away from us. LACUNY is a dynamic community of professionals dedicated to advancing the field of librarianship and championing the power of knowledge and information. American Library Association President Emily Drabinski will deliver the highly anticipated keynote address, setting the stage for 2 days of dynamic discussions, thought-provoking presentations, and invaluable networking opportunities. The theme of this year's LACUNY Institute is Moving Beyond the Challenged Librarian, Then and Now, reflecting our commitment to exploring the evolving landscape of librarianship and addressing the challenges faced by information professionals across the profession. These next 2 days, we will delve into topics such as intellectual freedom, censorship, and the role of librarians in navigating complex issues. From radical collaborations that push boundaries to interactive presentations that spark dialogue, our program is designed to inspire, inform, and empower. We have an excellent set of presentations, including the keynote address, again, which will be delivered by Professor Emily Drabinski. Professor Emily Drabinski is Associate Professor at the Queens College Graduate School of Library and Information Studies. She edits Gender and Sexuality in Information Studies, a book series from Library Juice Press, Litwin Books. She serves as 2023-2024 President of the American Library Association. Before beginning, I just want to share that to all attendees, you can actually leave questions, remarks via the chat box on YouTube, or you can email Mark or myself directly, and we will put that information in the chat box. But without any further ado, Professor Emily Drabinski.
Thank you so much, Professor Santana, and good morning, everyone. It's so delightful to be with all of you at CUNY again this year. I've been an academic librarian for more than 20 years, and throughout my career, the spring meeting of the LACUNY Institute has been a highlight of my calendar. I look forward every year to meeting with my colleagues, not just in New York City, but as LACUNY has expanded its reach and remit, to meet with librarians from all over the country who take seriously the issues that are of concern to those of us who are academic librarians in the city. In my new role at Queens College, I am teaching in the library school full-time and meeting the future librarians of CUNY and the rest of our library systems in the city. And it's just a real honor to be with you all again here today. I'm going to try to keep my remarks to about half an hour. I just feel like you can't listen to me talk for that much longer. So I want to encourage folks, as Nelson said, to share questions, feedback, or anything in the YouTube chat. And hopefully we'll be able to have a conversation about some of the issues that are facing librarians right now. And I appreciate so much the theme of LACUNY this year, Beyond the Band Librarian, the Challenged Librarian. I think we talk a lot, and I'm going to talk quite a bit this morning about the challenges we're facing. But I think all of those challenges, not to be like a cheesy bumper sticker, but those are opportunities as well. I've spent 20 years as a librarian being told that libraries were obsolete, that we don't matter anymore, that the internet portal means that we don't need librarians or libraries. I'll never forget the first meeting I had at when I was a new faculty member at Long Island University's Brooklyn campus. When I went to the faculty, the meet and greet when you first start, and the vice president, his whole presentation to the academic staff of the institution that we're joining, and that was 12. Oh man, I'm old. That was like 15 years ago. But the story that he told all of us then was that the library was just a portal to all of the information available on the internet, that we were on the verge of being library free. And that as a focus of his academic vision for the future, one that has unfortunately taken hold at a lot of our institutions over the past decade, sort of chilling, right? Because and I, as much as I know, that it's librarians like you and me that make institutions work, that make universities work, that we are the stuff at the heart of the academic project. But I want to start by talking a little bit about what I've spent my last year doing, which is not working as an academic librarian, but instead serving in the role of president of the American Library Association. And I'll tell you a couple of stories. I'm talking to you now from Salt Lake City, Utah, where I'm joining the Utah Library Association and their chapter conference this week. And to get here, I drove through Idaho, my home state, and visited my mom, who's very proud of me and had a wonderful time. But it gave me an opportunity driving those miles to meditate on and think about what's happened in Idaho and the state of libraries in Idaho. So I'm going to share a little about that, and I promise it'll be relevant to those of us who are academic librarians, everybody here in the room, I think. So in October of 2022, a librarian named Kimber Glidden, who was working at the Boundary County Public Library, which is the northern county in Idaho. We look like a sort of I'm always like, have you ever heard of the state, right? Like in New York, nobody's ever heard of it, but it's a state, it goes like that. And Boundary County is right up here at the top of the panhandle at the border of Canada. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been and ever seen. Sort of verdant wilderness of Idaho, just gorgeous mountains and weather and lakes, and the alpine lake that is for me sort of the best scenery to look at. It is also historically the home of intense pretty well organized white supremacist movements that have made Northern Idaho their home. When I was growing up in the state, it was the Aryan Nation. They had their headquarters there. That association has since dispersed, but it doesn't mean that Northern Idaho has changed in terms of its politics. And in fact, in some ways, it's gotten even worse as organized extremist elements have taken over that part of the country, both by settling it, by moving there, but also by organizing really intensely to take over every arm of the state, meaning so in Boundary County, where Kimber Glidden was the head librarian, that meant that extremists sort of owned the mayor's office, the school board, elected police chief positions, that sort of were in charge of the entire sort of county. But they didn't own the library board, and they didn't own the sheriff's office because the sheriff was not elected. And so the library became a target for organized pro-censorship elements that, they've taken the library as their target, but we know that their target is much broader than that. So once one afternoon, a member of the community came in and confronted Kimber with a list of 500 books that they were demanded to be removed from the library. And this is a story I think we've all heard a lot in libraries over the last couple of years. These organized groups that are come up with a list of books that they want removed from libraries, and then they work together with sort of organizing people in communities through groups like Moms for Liberty to use this list as a tool for challenging the library collections in their own communities. What's interesting about the Kimber Glidden story, though, is when they came with that list of books to her small library in Northern Idaho, how many of those books do you think were on the list? Or were in her collection? Zero, none. None of the books were in her library at all. And so on the one hand, there's the sort of problem of the fact that why weren't those books in the library? Because you can imagine the content of those books, right? They weren't random. It wasn't books that I don't want in my library, right? Like if I was building a library collection, it wouldn't have any science fiction in it. I don't like it. It has a robot, an alien, it's in space. I don't want to read it, right? So like that personal opinion that I might have, that's not what they were banning. They were banning books that were about people like me, right? As an openly out lesbian, queer member of the library profession, they were looking to ban books about me and my experience. LGBTQ plus content, anything relating to gender, race, and class, books by and about Black authors or Black experience, books about people of color, books by Indigenous Americans, anything that addresses sort of the difficult history of this country in terms of its suppression of certain kinds of ways of being and the deep racism that it sits at the heart of, I think, the American project. Those are the books that sort of discuss that and unveil the truth of that are the books that were challenged, and books that belong in every library, and frankly belong probably in Kimber's. But she had a small library and it didn't have those books. And so one would think in a normal world, you could say, I don't have those books in my collection, and the conflict would be over. But of course, that's not what happened. Kimber began, and her staff began to face loud, organized groups of people opposed to LGBTQ plus and BIPOC people. They would show up en masse at library board meetings, highly disruptive. They would come into the branch, follow Kimber and her staff around the library. They would even follow Kimber and her staff home. Kimber told me that she would often leave her house in the morning and find that someone was parked in a car outside of her home with guns. And that's the threatening atmosphere. So all built and organized around a thing that isn't even happening, right? And so how do you fight back against that? So it's very, that's the sort of Kimber Glidden story. And I'll tell you what ended up happening. She couldn't handle it anymore. It wasn't a way that she could live. She didn't want to run a library with the kinds of restrictions that were demanded of her. And so she quit. She resigned from her position because she had been a vocal and outspoken advocate for inclusion of these kinds of materials in the library. She became a target and sort of the named person that the sort of extremist groups were organizing around. And as often happens, and those of us who read Sarah Ahmed will be familiar with this, the person who makes the argument in public against something like this becomes the person who's somehow responsible for it. And so she carries that with her and has actually been unable to find another position in libraries. You know, the way that if you complain, you become the problem. And so Kimber has had to leave the field altogether. And last time I talked to her a couple of weeks ago, she was working as a night billing supervisor in a hospital, had to leave the field altogether. So I think when we see these stories about censorship and book bans that are activating all of us, it's important to remember what that human impact is, that it sort of drove a librarian who, you know, is no radical, right? She's just believes in the right to read and believes in libraries, she came from Alaska, and she's, you know, she and I wouldn't agree about much, but we definitely agreed about the importance of the library, that it drove her completely out of the profession, and ended up making the state agency that insures public libraries, that insures public buildings, would no longer for a time insure libraries, given that they were under such intense public attack, and you know, that it was more likely to be firebombed than not. And so that was not a risk that the public insurer would take. So that's the sort of the intensity, I think, of the stakes and the material issues that the material impact that this causes for those librarians on the front lines of the fight. So that's depressing. And I'm seeing that when I travel the country and talk to librarians, that sort of story happens over and over and over again. And it's not just in places like Idaho or places like Texas and Florida, but it's also a problem in places like New York, especially upstate New York, where you know, we've got very highly conservative pockets where certain organized individuals are tearing apart the library, which in many ways tears apart the town, and puts people in conflict with each other over what you know, as those of us who work in libraries, it's like the fight is over the right of a kid to read a book, which I think all of us could get behind. Kids should read. It seems non-controversial. So we've got these sort of on the ground attacks on libraries, but we also have legislative efforts that have, I think, a broader reach, but they're a little less spectacular in terms of the stories that you're able to tell. There's not a lot of great footage of people deliberating in Congress or in state legislatures about banning books, but I think it's equally important to understand the legal picture and what adverse legislation is coming and what it looks like for librarians on the ground. So I'll stick with Idaho for another few minutes, and I promise I'll talk about New York. But just about a month ago, 3 weeks, a month ago, the governor of Idaho signed in a new law into policy in Idaho that makes it that the legislation says that anyone doesn't have to be a member of the community, could be anyone, who goes into a library and finds a piece of a book or a program or anything, right, that they find objectionable in the youth section, they can ask for that material to be moved. And the librarian, if the library does not move that book, then they are subject to a $250 fine. So in that $250, I find to be a number that is both petty and small, right? $250 in the scope of a large library budget is very small. And so it's like it's petty in that way, but it's also devastating to rural libraries whose budgets can't actually accommodate a $250 fine. And it also undermines, of course, the autonomy and authority of library workers, whose collection building is sort of what we do for a living, right? And so even if you are not, even if you could absorb that fine, the way that it opens you up to attack, not just from people who live in your community, but from everybody, is extraordinarily dangerous, and feels to library workers in the state like it has a chilling effect that will last for a very, very, very long time. News came out this week of a small library in Preston, Idaho, that in response to this overbroad legislation made the decision to simply close the doors. Said we cannot make heads or tails of what the implications of this law for us. We don't want to be shut down. If we get many of these challenges, our budget will be gone. And so the response was to simply close the library altogether. People can come to the library to pick up books, but they can't go into the library and do what we know are the the things that libraries do that are so important, right? Provide indoor public space to people who would not otherwise have access to it, bathrooms, drinking fountains, a place to sit down and get out of the cold and get out of the heat. Those essential elements of the library are no longer available in Preston. So I think as we think about what the organized censorship movement is doing to libraries, I think it's important to connect not these two pieces, right? The sort of spectacular protest with the taking of legislative and electoral power that we see these opponents of libraries taking. They are running for library boards so that they can control them. They are passing legislation to undermine libraries' capacity to do their work. And I see all of this as a sort of eliminationist effort, not just of the people whose lives and stories are represented in the books that they're challenging and targeting, but also those of us who, the institution itself, and those of us who work inside of it. So I think in some ways the field has, by defining the problem as banned books, we miss the opportunity to make the broader connection that these attempts to ban books are also attempts to ban people, and they're attempts to ban, in some ways, the library itself. So as an academic librarian, my introduction to censorship was mostly from my academic sort of brain, right? And so if you know me and know my work, you know that I'm very interested in analytical, sort of theoretical takes on library issues of the day. And so for me, censorship has not, during my career, felt like a priority for us to think about in academic libraries. Our spaces of free inquiry, we are places where the attempts to ban books, we're not seeing them in quite the same way. So in my head, I was always thinking abstractly about censorship. But this past year, talking to librarians on the ground in small and rural libraries especially, but in big systems as well, I've come to understand that the censorship attempts are just one piece of what I think we can all understand as a broader and longer term attempt to undermine the capacities of our public institutions. So I'd like to turn to a conversation about that now to try to make that connection to what we're seeing in academic libraries, and why I think that if academic librarians can see our own struggles as of a piece and aligned with what's happening in school and public libraries, it holds some promise for all of us in the profession to sort of come together across those sort of institutional lines to both support each other and to fight alongside each other in the face of the challenges that are sort of unique to each part of the sector, but I think are tied as a through line throughout. So as a New Yorker, I've been thinking about book banning. As a New York City resident, thinking about book banning and the ways that attempts to censor materials are playing out in places like where we are, where you don't see as many spectacular challenges like the 500 book list and the blowing of a shofar at the board meeting, but you do see slow motion chipping away at the capacity of libraries, public, school, and academic in New York City to do the kind of work that we want to do. So there haven't been bans in New York City public libraries in the same way, but there have been concerted attempts by the city government to eliminate funding for libraries. So in New York City, I'm not sure how many of us are from other parts of the country, but in New York City, libraries are looking at significant budget cuts, two big swaths that are eliminating, first eliminated Sunday service from the library, and then there are new rounds of budget cuts that may eliminate stable 6-day service in the systems all across the city. So these are not attempts to ban books by queer people, like we're seeing in Idaho, but they are attempts to do exactly what happened in Preston, to close the library and shutter it, which is another way to ban a book, right? So if you are unable to get access to a book because you work during the week and Sunday's your only time, or this is the day that you have available, eliminating that time is the equivalent of removing access in precisely the same way that censoring books might be, and in fact, in some ways, is even a broader assault, right? Because if the library is closed, you don't have access to the books, but you also don't have access to all of the services inside of the library that I just talked about, the important sort of placemaking and community making function of the library. So we're seeing book bans in that way. For those of us working in CUNY libraries, and now that I'm at Queens College, I can speak directly to the Queens experience. We're facing cuts to the CUNY budgets that are eliminating, at Queens have eliminated several positions in the library and have limited the collection development budget in ways that will leave a continuing big hole in the CUNY library collections if we're unable to claw back the resources that we need to fill our shelves with the books that we know are a part of what our students and faculty need to do the work of the academy. And so it's not a book ban, but when you work in a library in an institution like ours, where you don't have a librarian in charge of OER anymore, that undercuts the ability of the library to deliver on its mission of providing access to information for everyone. Now, if I'm talking to Kimber in Idaho, it's that link, making that tie between what we're facing, what she's facing, can be a little bit complicated, because to understand and unpack the way that the CUNY budget works is it's a little more boring than the story of the shofar. So one of my challenges, and I'm trying it out today, is how do we tell the story and make the link between what we're seeing in academic libraries and what we're seeing in public and school libraries. So even if it's not a ban in the same way, it's functionally a ban and it's working in the same way. I also think about what in some ways I think of as eliminationist efforts to get rid of queer people, Black people, people of color, Indigenous people, to get rid of our stories, to eliminate our access, to prevent us from being in the system at all. They're eliminationist efforts, but they're also, and to eliminate the library altogether, but they're also attempts to undermine our agency and authority as library workers. So thinking about moving from a banned books narrative to a narrative of what do we share in common with people facing censorship, even if the way that attack is coming at us is a little bit different, right? And I think it is both in limiting the number of resources that we have available and undercutting our autonomy in our libraries to make decisions that work best for our students and faculty. And that undermining of authority and agency is the piece that I think is most important for us to connect to, right? Because that's what these are. In all across the country, we're seeing adverse legislation that would eliminate the MLS as a degree requirement for librarians in the state. We could have an entire conversation about the value of the MLS and whether it's necessary for library work. That's one conversation. I want to put that to the side. But if you look at this as instead part of an ongoing attempt to undercut the last public institution in America that has as its purpose to help people and help solve their problems. That's what a library is. We help solve people's problems. That it's an attempt to open those positions up to political appointees that don't share our values, our commitments to intellectual freedom, to the right to privacy, to the right of equal access to information for everyone. So we have legislation that we're seeing that's like that. We have legislation that requires, there's legislation that passed in Oklahoma that requires database providers or providers of electronic information to ensure that there are no inappropriate materials in the database that would be distributed to K-12 students. In the state of Oklahoma, databases and electronic materials are acquired at the state level for everyone in the state, right? So the state has a contract. And I was talking to a librarian in Oklahoma who was working with a student at the University of Oklahoma, working with a student on a paper about reproductive rights and reproductive health. And they were having real trouble finding that information in the database. And so they did what we do as librarians, right? They're like, well, it should be in there. Why isn't it there? Let me try some other keywords. Let me shake the database a little bit. And she came to understand through her poking around, not because anything had been communicated, not because the implications of this new rule had been understood and shared with her, but through a kind of problem-based learning came to understand that she was working with the same database that the K-12 students were working with. And then in order to protect profit and protect like their ability to do business in the state, database companies had been removing content from databases before contracting with the state of Oklahoma. So that's another way that we see censorship, the battle against organized censorship is sort of making its way into the library, the academic library space. And finally, I think, when we look at school libraries, which is where the censorship battle has been the most fierce and the most heated, sort of organized around an idea of child safety, which I always find sort of hard to swallow, right? Because you don't often see attempts to censor materials happening from the same people who want to expand food access in schools, right? Like I haven't done the math, but it would be interesting to compare states that have eliminated access to reading materials in schools for children with states that have rejected federal aid for school food programs. So if you really cared about student safety, you'd want students to be fed, right? And the fact that these two don't come together, it just gives the lie to me to the claim that it's anything about school safety. But I think for those of us in academic libraries, we have long seen issues and problems and policies that begin in school libraries make their way into our academic spaces. I'm thinking in terms of focus on quantitative assessment, on the need to prove our value, the need to sort of organize ourselves entirely around outcomes that can be measured rather than the kind of one-on-one work that we do with students and faculty every day that demonstrates our value to us and to them, but may not be countable in the same way. And so just as those attempts to ban and censor materials, just as that assessment piece has come through, it would not surprise me if censorship attempts began to come through in academic libraries as well. So we need to be sort of watching for that to happen. And I'll be interested in the conversation if anyone in the audience has stories of that already happening. I will say that our Office of Intellectual Freedom at the American Library Association tracks attempts to censor materials and attempts to censor materials and programs related to what's happening in Gaza right now. Academic libraries are the place that is facing those sets of challenges more than our school and public library counterparts, although who knows, that could change. So this is sort of the scope of the problem that I'm seeing it. And as an academic librarian, I know that we have in many ways, especially those of us who are in unionized faculty positions that give us an uncommon level of job security, that I think this is a moment where we need to use that job security. We need to use the capacities that we have that might be more than our school and public librarians to join what we see as our struggles for resources, struggles for autonomy and authority, struggles for sort of power within the academy, that if we can link those struggles to what we see happening in public and school libraries, we have the promise of a broader movement that could address the sort of root issues of what we're facing, which I see as weakened public institutions through probably 4 decades of systematic disinvestment in the things that those of us who work in libraries care about, expanding access to public goods for everyone in our communities. So sort of a grim story. I've spent a year sort of like soaking in the grimness of it all, and it's been very heavy. I've got 6 weeks left, not that I'm counting, but I have been lucky to see a lot of wins, and so I want to close with a few of those, just to give folks some hope, I guess. And I keep coming back again and again to this phrase from, or this quote from Audre Lorde: "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." Right? This the sense that we can't change things from the inside. But Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who's a CUNY professor at the Graduate Center, says the most important piece in that phrase is really the apostrophe. That the problem is the master's tools. If there are tools and it's our house, then there is change we can make, and change we can make together. The most inspiring example of that I have seen is in St. Tammany Parish in Louisiana, a community just across Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans, much more conservative than the city, definitely not a place where There are a whole lot of queer people. And when a couple of queers, Mel Manuel and Jeremy Thompson, moved from New Orleans to St. Tammany, they did what queers always do. They didn't have a lot of friends, and so they started a kind of community group. They call it Queer North Shore. They did what queers always do. They got together, potluck, picnic. You bring the lentils, I'll bring the lentil loaf. Right? They had skating parties, nights at bars, just casual social gatherings that knit together a group of queer people in the community who understood themselves as activists or organizers necessarily, but as friends and comrades, in the way that you come together when you're in a sort of a minority in a community. That group, when they started to see what was happening in their library, and St. Tammany is the sort of the hottest of the hot spots. Louisiana has, as a state, has the most adverse legislation impacting libraries in their current legislative session. The governor, who is driving a lot of the efforts to restrict what is available in libraries in the state, he announced his tip line. When he was attorney general, and he went to St. Tammany to announce a tip line where you could rat out your librarians or teachers for distributing inappropriate materials, which, as a reminder, is materials about people like me and maybe people like you, right? Like our stories. It's a very, very hot spot. But the Queer North Shore people, they had all this experience coming together, and they used that to begin coming together around the sort of book banning that was happening in their library. And they would show up at the board meetings en masse, a tried and true technique from our opponents. They use that same technique, and they would pack the room with people who supported the library, making it very clear in a very loud way that the library staff that they had support, but also to the city, so that the people in the parish, so that the people in the parish understood that they were not alone, and that there were people fighting for the right to read and fighting for the right to access these stories. So that group has done all kinds of amazing things. They're this month holding the first Pride Parade in St. Tammany that they've ever had in a parish that has been really focused on eliminating queer experience from the public discourse. They have pushed back and resisted that, and are having a Pride Parade this month, the first one in the parish, which is going to be very exciting. And they're great at costuming, as people are in New Orleans. But also, if you talk to Mel and Jeremy, they'll tell you that they very quickly saw that there were limits, hard limits, on the success of their movement if they did not also, while building the sort of mass power strategy, if they did not also work to take state power, right? If they did not attend to that apostrophe, they did not go and take the tools and put them in their hands so that they would be the ones making policy for the state. So they've begun those efforts. Both Mel and Jeremy are taking on roles in political parties in the state, really focusing on building collective power within state structures that have access to the tools of public life, things like exactly the kinds of policies that are currently being passed in Louisiana, as well as just like the budget, right? Like, if we had a budget, if we were in control of the budget and got to spend it the way we wanted to, we would spend it on libraries, right? Like, we would invest in public institutions that serve the public good. So those of us who believe in libraries, work in libraries, value libraries, focusing on both the mass power movement building that we're seeing, as well as the taking political power in ways that give us more access to tools, to two ways of thinking about this. And I think they align pretty well with the sort of two ways that we're seeing organized censorship impact communities, both in the on-the-ground activist sort of assaults, as well as the state legislative efforts, where we see that legislative control is going to be necessary if we're going to win the day. So that's sort of what I'm seeing. I'm seeing some hope. I do think, as we say in the labor movement, and those of us who are here from the PSC know, management is the best organizer, and management has been working overtime for the past year. And I am gratified to see a lot of organizing happening around the country. It's been a difficult year for me, just as one of the people who is the face of a lot of the right-wing attacks on libraries right now. But I'm in Utah this week. and Utah invited me, and they didn't have to. And so, you know, I'm seeing librarians standing together and standing on the right side of history, as we always do. And I look forward to talking with all of you about what we can do as CUNY librarians, as academic librarians, to ensure that we are using the skills and capacities that we have in what I see as a fight for all of us. So I'll end there. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to the conversation.
Wow. Thank you so much for that amazing keynote address, Professor Drabinski, President Drabinski. Wow. There are comments on our YouTube feed. Well, I know you were delivering the keynote address, so you were not able to read them. Would you like to read them on your own, or do you want me to read them here?
Are there any questions in the chat?
Not as of this moment. There are, I won't, there is a question. I mean, we're just so appreciative of you going through and providing these examples. For example, Kimber Glidden, leaving the profession altogether, or vendors going into their databases to remove content. I believe in the state of Oklahoma, you stated, okay, to avoid losing their contracts as a means to appease state legislators. It's very troubling and dangerous. I mean, this could even affect possibly users in other states where they might accidentally delete content, may have content removed that is accessible to them, but then all of a sudden is no longer accessible. So this is thank you for fighting the good fight to you and your colleagues. As a
Yeah, and
vocal,
I mean, you know, just a comment on that, Nelson, like, you know, we have so much less control over our collections than we used to, right? As we contract with database firms and sort of essentially outsource that selection element for all kinds of reasons that's a whole other conference to talk about. It has made it so that it's, you know, that's an additional challenge beyond what we're facing from activists in this state.
so troubling. As a vocal advocate against challenged books, or challenge material, not just books, it goes beyond books, as you so clearly articulated today. What strategies or approaches do you find most effective in engaging with individuals or groups who advocate for book censorship or restriction? And I guess the second part of this question is, how and where can people interested in combating these challenges start? Which I know is there are people who want to begin, but for some reason, there's this hesitation. And I'm sorry for these two loaded questions. I can repeat them if you need it.
So I think we'll say the first one again.
Yes, of course. Sorry about that. Again, what strategies or approaches do you find most effective in engaging with individuals or groups who advocate for censorship or some sort of restriction?
Yeah, so I think, you know, this is like, I'm a big believer that library skills are organizing skills, that library skills are power building skills, that what it takes to build a movement is somebody willing to go to the meeting and take the minutes. Check, that's a bunch of us, right? People who have spreadsheets and you know, are able to use them. Check, I've got like 6 tabs open with Google Sheets right now. Like, we're always gathering data. We're always putting things in order. We're always talking to people. You know, you try to start an instruction, a library instruction or information literacy program embedded in a particular program or discipline, and you send an email and they don't respond, and then you send it again and they don't respond, and then you go to the faculty meeting and you talk, and, you know, like that, a willingness to go the extra mile, right? And then for this question of like, how do we engage with people who are opposed to us, I think that our reference interview skills are what comes in handy, right? So that someone could come into the library. I talked to a librarian in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, and he had a mom come in with a list of books, and he knew her, right? Because she, like, we know our patrons, and she was a homeschool mom who used the library all the time. And she came in with that list of books, and his response was, what are you talking about? Like, I know you love the library. You're here all the time. So you're telling me what you don't want. What do you want, right? Like, can you tell me a little more about what you want in the library? And so she had a list of much shorter list, right, of publications that I probably wouldn't want to read. And he was able to buy a couple of those copies for the library, and that mollified her. But I think there's a big difference between people who come to the library with a challenge because they are concerned about a book, which, like, frankly, that's okay, right? Like, we want people to engage in public institutions. Like, we should demand more of our public institutions, so that's not a problem. But the people who come in with these long lists, I think of them as the people that you're just never going to win with. You know, like, you've got your instruction load, and you have these 10 faculty in the composition department, and there's always one who will never say yes to your request to come into the library, right? And one could bang their head against that for your entire career, or you could focus on the 9 people who want you to come to their class. And so I think in some ways the best way to engage is to not engage at all, right? And to engage the people who support you and advocate for you, and sort of feed those relationships, because those are the relationships that will get you past the one that's the real puzzle and the real challenge. And on the question of what to do, I think, honestly, anything. I, I I think we often think there's some grand plan and we have to wait until we understand it fully, and just, we can't work until we've got everybody's on board, and that stalls us out. The only way to see if your strategy is going to work is to try it out. So I was like, let me run for ALA president. Let me see if there are tools inside of this association that we can use to advance the cause of libraries, which I see as the cause of the world, right? That if we had a robust and well-funded, well-resourced, faculty-led CUNY, right? New York City would be a different place, right? It would be better, I believe. And so, are there tools inside of the American Library Association that can assist us in building that capacity? So I don't know, I won't know until I've been out of the role for a little while and can reflect on what I've learned, but, like, you got to just try it, right? So I think the very low level stuff that people need to do is, if you do not have a public library card, go and get a public library card. If you have a kid in the public schools who doesn't have a library, contact your principal and say, I want my kid to have a library. Like, the basic things. Public institutions are use it or lose it propositions. So if we think about the public institutions that persist, that don't face the kinds of challenges that libraries are facing right now, they're the ones that everybody uses. Very few people organize it against Social Security, very few people organize it against Medicare, and that's because those are institutions that all of us benefit from. So if we have everybody using the library, many fewer people will see it as an institution that needs dismantling, right? And so getting a library card and using it, and then, in schools, principals need to hear from parents. They need to hear from us that we understand that, study after study demonstrates, if you have a certified school librarian and a funded school resource school library in a school, children's literacy rates go up. Study after study, there's no question about it. We know it. There's no question. Like, there's just no disagreement at all. Like, we know the answer here. So what needs that, like, knowing that, what work do we have to do to get principals to see that and to begin to invest their school funds in a school library? And so that becomes the organizing project, and it begins, with the PTA or you calling your principal. And, none of us have to do a big thing. Just doing a little thing is really important for all of us to do.
I appreciate your response, right? And just like you say, just start small. Take the minutes of a meeting. I mean, I think a lot of people need to hear this. It's not just having a grand plan and just taking action. My oldest turned 4, and last month, I believe it was, they took him to the library, the Brooklyn Public Library, and he has his library card. So it starts at a young age. Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing that. Yeah.
Another question for you, and it's pivoting a bit, but as both a faculty member in the library school graduate program at Queens College and the president of the American Library Association this past year, How do you see the role of library education evolving to address emerging challenges and opportunities in the field, particularly in the areas such as digital literacy, information access, and community engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I think library school curricula is has a lot to do with how new librarians think, right? Like I think about my own library school education, where I took a class with um, Barbara Kwasnick, who was at Syracuse University, and she taught the knowledge organization class. And I took the class and I didn't become a cataloger at all, but the way that she talked about information organization shaped my entire career, right? Every question I ask is a question that emerged for the first time 25 years ago in Dr. Kwasnick's class. Um, it was not so much, it wasn't so much that I built the skills necessary for the job that I started, um, like next, but that I had a mindset and a way of thinking about knowledge organization as a project of power that like I wouldn't have had that had I not gone to library school and had that class with her. So I think there's often we hear like there needs to be a push to make the degree more relevant. But when I was in library school, I took a whole class on how to build an access database, and then nobody used access databases like 2 years later. So I think what we mean when we say that is a little more nuanced than like it can't be a tools based instruction because the tools that we use change so rapidly. And so I think, but what I do think is that library students are not graduating from library schools with the fullest sense of the challenges they're going to face. So it isn't that I would redevelop the curriculum so that we address book banning, because honestly, I think this, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm just hopeful, but there has Ron DeSantis pulled back from book banning as his like gubernatorial priority, right? And I think he did that because he knew it was the issue had become a loser. That last midterm election cycle, 60% of Moms for Liberty back candidates lost their election for school board. People who had those ideas won, but as soon as people know that the idea is tied to that approach, people don't like it and they're not voting for it. So I think like the book banning piece, in 2 years, it's going to be different. And so I wouldn't want to rebuild the curriculum around that. But I do think that library school curriculum needs to address the expanding remit of public libraries, which is something that I'm seeing that we're not talking enough about, I think, about that challenge. People need to understand the core values that we bring to the profession, that intellectual freedom isn't an abstraction, it isn't a thing that we care about up here in the ether, but that what that means for us on the ground in a face-to-face situation, what it means for us when we get into a library and we have to decide between hosting a drag queen story hour, knowing that it will cause a lot of conflict and upset sort of distress in the community, or saying no to it because we'd rather not take on that fight, right? And how do we build ourselves up to the point where we can hold that story time because the community wants it, even in the face of those kinds of challenges. And that fortitude comes from, I think, having a clear sense of our core values and understanding of what it means to be a librarian, the sort of broader sense of the profession. So I think that, because like I know we're going to have to teach about ChatGPT and AI, but we can't teach about those things without embedding them in the core values of the profession, and that's sort of what I see as most important.
Fantastic. I mean, I have many more questions, but there are questions coming in. They're flooding my inbox. So let's go here. It's a great thing. It's a great thing.
Good.
Thank you for being so generous with your time. The next question is from Professor Sherry G. Farber, Assistant Professor Librarian at Hunter College Libraries. She asks, how do you see the book ban movements and broader political challenge of the neoliberal project to control education at all levels?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sherry, for that question. I think that we have to understand them together. Attempts to control curriculum, for example, which is something that we have, a lot of experience with, a growing experience. I think we're going to have more of it in CUNY and in universities, right? I look at what happened to West Virginia University this year, where the administration voted to eliminate foreign languages. They voted to eliminate the math department, like voted to eliminate any number of liberal arts and sciences that, for those of us who believe in higher education, like we believe in those things, like we believe in an educated electorate, we believe in educated citizens, educated people, right? Like we want people to read. And so those sort of efforts to, because I can't be the only one at a campus where program review is coming. And I understand that program review is like obviously important to understand if our curriculum is meeting sort of the needs of the community. But I see all over the country program review as code for eliminating the liberal arts and sciences. And so that's a ban, right? That's a book ban. But it's also about reducing the power of teachers, faculty, of the people who sort of are at the heart of the institution, reducing our capacity to make curricular decisions, say, undermining the authority and agency of workers and sowing distrust in public institutions. That's what I see as the neoliberal project, and book bans are absolutely a part of that, a spectacular part of that. But if we don't draw the line, if we don't draw that connection, then we're going to end up in a situation where the solution to the problem is that the book remained on the shelf. And while the book on the shelf is critically important, having the book on the shelf while the institution crumbles around it, that's not a win from where I come from.
Thank you so much. By the way, I'm asking the questions as they are coming in, so I hope everyone is patient. We have quite a few more. We have 2 more questions at least right now. The next question comes from Professor Jessica Brangio, Head of Electronic Resources and Media at Swarthmore College McCabe Library. Thank you for your tremendous work. I wonder if you have heard if the anti-DEIA efforts that some states are imposing on their public universities, and if they are starting to infiltrate the library, or if academic librarians have considered this and have started thinking about how to proactively push back. I can ask the question again, and I will also post it on internally via Zoom.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your question. And absolutely, those efforts hit libraries. So in states like Iowa, where I was visiting Iowa last summer, and the state had just passed a law that limited the number, that eliminated DEI programming, or I can't remember the details about the law, but I talked with librarians at Iowa State who were seeing an immediate impact on things like the names they use for their programs, for the words they use for their displays, right? Like the way that they talk in their curricular documents and in their organizational documents. Because so many of us have, over the last many years, put real work into developing DEI programs that are meaningful and impactful, and they guide our collection development and the way that we teach in our libraries. And so those states are definitely coming into academic libraries. There's a good survey that came out from Ithaca that I can find and share with you, Nelson, or share with you, Jessica, if you send me an email. My email is easy to find, that talks about how academic libraries are preparing to fight back, and how they are fighting back against censorship in the ways that you're describing here, and like attempts to control curriculum. I wish I could say that I was hearing a lot of organizing happening. I'm hearing a lot of people complying, and I understand that we have to do that. That if they're going to ding us for the LibGuide, we got to change the LibGuide, right? But if that's not paired with organizing and activism against the entities that are forcing those choices on us, I have a lot of fear for what will end up happening in certain parts of the country where that kind of legislation is in place. So thinking about both, I mean, we have to, in many, we're always making compromises, right? And I try to, is the action I'm going to take right now going to build the institution that I want to build? It's like always a question I'm asking myself when I do something. And so I think we need to begin talking really openly about the kind of work that we need to be doing. You look at what happened to the University of Texas, where they eliminated faculty positions for the librarians. And that's, if we got to link that all together to get I think a fuller picture of how to fight. But I would love to hear academic library stories about proactively pushing back, because I frankly haven't heard a lot of those out on the road this year.
Thank you so much for that response, Professor Drabinski. We have a question, this one, not from email, but from the YouTube chat box. And this is from Professor Ian McDermott from LaGuardia Community College. What kind of organizing ideas do you have around a current issue like library access restrictions at CUNY libraries in the wake of the student encampments?
Thanks for your question, Ian. And I've been traveling this week in rural Oregon, so I'm less familiar with what those library access restrictions are right now. I think the most effective organizing is organizing that is like addresses really fundamental issues, right? So if you're going to succeed at a CUNY school in your CUNY education, you need to have access to the library. It's crucial, right? Like that is the way that we learn, right? Libraries are the essential to the project of higher education. And I feel like we have to say that I feel like we even have to say that has been a sort of depressing, challenging part of life right now. But exactly the kind of organizing that we do through the PSC and through other entities that are about ensuring that our working conditions are such that we can facilitate the learning conditions of students, that like, I don't know, what tools are we using that we already have that we're organizing with, and how can we put libraries sort of at the heart of that? I haven't been involved in that kind of activism this year due to my position at ALA, but I would imagine that the challenge will be what it kind of always is for libraries, putting the library issue at the front of the organizing that's happening on the broader front. So I don't know if library access restrictions are something that is in the organizing happening on campus, you would know. But like I've been struck by the sort of watching the library issues that I think are, definitely the ones that I would think about when it comes to what's happening in Gaza don't seem to be, I'm not hearing a lot about them from the broader movement for the rights of Palestinians and for an end to the violence. And so, the entities that are organizing, they need to know that the library is like a good site for organizing. That's something that the right has found out, right? That like the library, and people go in, everybody uses it. It's like a physical place you could occupy, right? Like it's a real place. And so making sure that the people we're organizing with understand that the library should be at the top of that list. I mean, that's been my priority this year, is to put libraries at the top of the organizing list. Because I think if you solve the problems of the library, you solve the problems of the world. I believe that, so. But I can't wait to get home, Ian, and learn more about what kind of organizing is happening through those entities right now.
I love that quote. Did you just say, if you solve the problems of the library, you solve the problems of the world?
Yeah, don't you think?
May
It's
I
like, think about what you're free to steal anything from me. None of my, I have the relationship you might expect with my property, so feel free.
Thank you so very much. So I thought there was another question. Oh, actually, yes. There are just comments on YouTube. There is Professor Sherry Farber asks, is there a role ALA can play? I'm sorry that I'm squinting. It's the way that it appears here, because there are no more, let me just copy it and paste it over here.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm like this many years old also. I totally get it.
Is there a role ALA can play in our local organizing around local efforts?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that question, all year, Sherry. What role can we play? And I think ALA can play a convening role and meaning that we get people together through our conferences, through our webinars, through our all kinds of sort of things. We pull people together. And that I think is the first sort of most important role that we can play. So in December, ALA brought the two people from each state, the presidents of the school library chapter and the public library chapter, to an event in not in Chicago. It was at the Chicago airport, but it was in Chicago-ish, to come together to talk about issues that they were facing on the ground, to share strategies for organizing to fight back. And it was a really beautiful, wonderful room to be in, because you had so many people from so many places dealing with all kinds of political situations and conditions, but working together to try to understand solutions. And so that was great. And everyone was trained in, everybody got media training and legislative advocacy training. And I think that kind of model we can iterate and make sort of, I hope that we're able to continue to fund that, because it was an important gathering and event. We're doing a second one later this month in Chicago called Law for Libraries, where we're bringing in the chairs of the intellectual freedom committees of each of the state chapters to talk about sort of get trained in legal analysis and legal sort of issues as they relate to the library sort of the library field, and they'll bring that back. And so that kind of convening role I think is important. And then the big role that ALA serves, and that I've seen in my time in the position, is that we have some capacity to shape stories and narratives about the library profession and the library field. So I don't know how many people saw John Oliver had a piece about book banning and censorship on one of his shows this week. So like that's a big audience, people who, maybe they think about their library exclusively in the terms of nostalgia, right? That's a place I went as a kid and that was awesome, but aren't thinking of them as the site for the kind of crucial political organizing that we're seeing happening right now. And ALA played a role in facilitating that story, sharing data and statistics and connecting things. And so shaping the public narrative, I think, is really important. That's been my focus in my presidential years, trying to tell the story of libraries so that everybody knows that we're the most important institution, that if you forget us, then you forget democracy, which sounds extreme, but it's sort of how I've been feeling. Like it feels like we're in a sort of last stand for the things that I care about, at least. So I think that narrative piece is really important. So for the end of my presidential term, we'll be driving from Rhode Island to San Diego for our annual conference, bringing a filmmaker with us to try to capture some of the stories of American libraries. And that will result in a short film about the power of libraries that will be available rights free to screen anywhere in any library to sort of help share that story as widely as possible. So I think that's the third thing I'd say.
Thank you so very much, Professor Drabinski. This has been a phenomenal start to the LACUNY Institute. I want to welcome everyone to take a look at the program. Everyone who registered has the program. The next sessions will start at 10:45 a.m. If you are 11:45 a.m. Hopefully I said that correctly. And we have two panels or two sessions next. If you are a panelist, please arrive at least 10 minutes earlier so that people can go there. And Professor Drabinski, do you have any last words to share with your audience here today?
I just can't wait to come home to CUNY. I really miss everyone. It's been a challenging year. I've learned a lot, but I just, it has meant so much to know that I have the support of my colleagues at CUNY behind me, and really excited to return to organizing full time with all of you. And thank you so much for coming out to listen to me talk again today. And thank you to everyone at LACUNY for the kind invitation to join you. And have a wonderful rest of your conference. I wish I could attend all of it, but I'll be here in Utah talking to our colleagues out here. So.
We know you have a very packed agenda, and we're just grateful that you were able to share some of your time with us. Thank you. You're one of CUNY's gems, and I'm glad that we have you here. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Okay. Take care, everyone. As I stated before, we have, I will share, I guess, the program link has been shared via the YouTube channel. which you can view there. And you can also, any information that you want with regard to the to this year's conference, you can view it there in on our official website, LACUNY website. Thank you all. Thank you for the wishes and have a wonderful day. And please note that the majority of the presentations at this year's LACUNY Institute will be recorded and made available within 2 weeks. Certainly by the end of this month, they will be available. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.